Everybody. My name is Nick Denning, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work that we've been doing to help customers to renovate their ABF and OpenROAD applications. So here's a sheet just to give you, so you can get in touch with me later on. And if I could draw you to your attention, my colleagues Georgia and Brooke down at the bottom, who are very excellent sales staff, who would be delighted to pick up and follow up with on any of the points with you that might be of interest. And of course, please feel free to link into all of us or send us an email. So here's the agenda. What are our objectives in trying to do an application refresh? How are we going to go about it? Principle of the approach. I'm going to start with ABF because that's the place where there are millions of lines of code out there, and many people perceive a really big problem with this code and how to renovate it. And then we're going to show you a staged approach, ultimately to the web, which has to be the objective of everybody in this day and age. We're going to show you how we're going to keep all your options open so you don't get stuck in betwixt and between. And we're going to show you the target architecture and the development approach. And then at the end, we'll talk about some futures, because we're not going to be able to cover everything today. And also, we haven't got all the answers either, but we can show you the places where we can start to think about doing things after we've got through the sorts of tasks we're doing here. So what are the objectives of application refresh? Well, there are millions of lines of code out there, amazing business logic, utterly reliable, been running for years, all locked up in that ABF code. So our approach is to simply service enable that code so that it can be called by web applications. We want to minimize the change of that code. We don't want to get into a rewrite. It's just a refactoring of the top service level there. So because of obviously that minimizes the amount of retesting one would have to do and maximizes the value of what you've got. And we're going to we want to do a phased, step-by-step approach. No big bang. Only migrating what's needed. Only doing stuff where there is a business case. And what we're particularly going to focus you on is actually how to leverage the OpenROAD workbench tooling and get some great productivity from that. So let's first talk about how initially we're going to take ABF to the web. So the first step is to separate the ABF code into frames and procedures. One procedure per transaction, obviously, because that's the way how web applications work. One HTTP call to the back end does one piece, and we're going to do that by using passing data by ActiveMQ. So we're going to create a client and server procedures and a simple call proc. We can, once we've got that working, then we can convert the ABF frame to OpenROAD. Actian have brought out some really interesting tooling called WebGen to help us to do that, so we can do it quickly and reliably. And once we've done that conversion and created the OpenROAD application, then obviously WebGen pumps that out. And after that, we're going to then say, what can OpenROAD offer us in the future, and why is it such a compelling path for future migration? So here is our classic ABF frame. It's got the form and it's got the frame code, and I'm just symbolizing and with some pseudocode in there the sorts of stuff that we do: bit of backend logic, bit of SQL logic, bit of forms logic, bit of SQL logic, bit of forms logic. And so what we need to do is to split this up into the ViVeFed form, and we need to take that frame OSQ, and we need to split it up so we can separate out the frame, let's call it the UI, from the procedure business logic. So and there's an example of how the procedure might look. Now, not a simple thing. It's going to have to be done by hand, but but this is where the Mark 1 eyeball is pretty sound, and we have some techniques and mechanisms that we're going to suggest you follow, and it's in terms of breaking this out. And here is where the challenge is. If you've got a 10,000 line form of frame piece of code, it's non-trivial, but actually most systems aren't like that. That's an extreme, and most systems do have relatively well segregated business logic and forms logic. One of the things that we're doing is we take essentially the essence of the model is we take all the data that's all the fields that are actually in the 5-thread form and as hidden fields in the frame, and we pop them into a structure, into a record, and then we pass that record to the stored procedure so that it has all the forms data that it can execute, that it needs to execute. And then at the end of it, if there are any changes, we return that data, and then we can pop the data that's in the return buffers back onto the form, transfer it into the forms, into the FRS fields. So once we've done that, when we've separated out the business logic into a frame UI and a procedure UI, now we can start to insert some C 3GL code, and this 3GL can pop our data that we would otherwise pass via a 4GL call proc, put it into a JSON message, place that on a ActiveMQ queue, and pass that to the backend. The backend is listening on the queue, reads the queue, extracts the JSON message, puts it into the 4GL variables, and calls the procedure exactly as if it was done before. So conceptually, no big deal. Obviously, non-trivial in terms of the potential for the amount of code we've got to write, depending on the complexity of the procedures. But it's possible, and we've got that working, and we can show it working. So let's think about the ABF development. So our objective over time is to move all that ABF logic to OpenROAD procedures. And that is a lot simpler now, but just moving procedures once we've unpicked all the forms capability. We could also move logic that is currently in SQL into stored procedures so it's globally available, and that's a pretty good idea to do anyway. How many places have we got something that's almost the same as everywhere else, but has been edited a little bit for some particular fix? So where that makes sense and whether we want to be coherent, then we can do so. And that means we're working both top down and bottom up. Bottom up means where we can see blocks of SQL that we can put into a stored procedure. We can cut it out of the bottom of the application, put it into a stored procedure and call it. And working top down, we can look at the services. We look at the services layer and wrap that. And I showed you in a previous diagram a simple mechanism where the front end calls the front end ABF application calls the back end via ActiveMQ. What we can also do is we can then migrate that logic by using JSON-C, the curl libraries, and we can make HTTP calls to an HTTP server, which then places the message on, or Tomcat, that places the message on the queue and communicates with the backend that way. Now, the key principle about this is we only migrate logic when we need to change it. So all of this stuff works. If you've got an application which has got 600 frames, you don't need to convert the whole 600 frames at one go. You can pick out, say, 6 frames that all support a single business process that perhaps 60% of your users perform, i.e. most of the traffic, and you can focus on just doing that, and you can leave all the rest of your applications that you run once a year still in the existing ABF application, because when we break it out, it's still the same code. And we could even consider Dockerizing our ABF applications at the back end. That is something we haven't done yet, but you've seen some of the other presentations about Dockerizing Ingress. So that's going to be very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing that myself. So if we talk about the progressive migration of the front end, let's just have a look at this. So here we've got an ABF application split into its 2 bits. We start up the right-hand side back-end application with a -p for a different procedure, which calls the 3GL procedures rather and minus no forms, and we get the 2 to communicate via the queues. So we've replaced that business logic and just made it globally accessible as a server. So now we can then move the ABF front-end application into OpenROAD and convert the frame UI into an OpenROAD frame script. Same old 3GL procedures. And we can start to, and we can then OpenROAD can then place the messages onto the queue and instead of the OpenROAD application, instead of the ABF application. And what Actian have produced are some tooling now which will harvest those ABF catalogs to create that OR frame. And once we've harvested that, now we're then available to we can then rework those frames based on our 4GL frames. And now we can deploy that via WebGen. So we've got moved from our ABF application that we split out, put it into OpenROAD, and we can run as an OpenROAD application, and then we can deploy it to the web. And the great thing here is that you can debug your OpenROAD application here, and it is exactly the same application that you then generate to create a web application. And if it works as an OpenROAD application, it should work as a web application. And just a couple of bits of pieces here, just annotating some of these connections. So once we've done that, now we can start to move this business logic out here into our OpenROAD application. And we can replace our queues with an HTTP RPC. So here, if we go and deploy Tomcat here, which you have already got if you're running an OpenROAD server anyway. So now we replace this 3GL, which was just keeping it simple and just doing the placing of messages on queues, and we can instead make HTTP calls using curl. And actually, if we've done that, then whenever OpenROAD wants to call any of the backends, if we want to get OpenROAD to call the backends, we can make HTTP calls to the to this HTTP server as well. So basically, we put all the we make an HTTP server the interface, and actually in here the queues are still there. It's the HTTP server is making the calls via queues to this application logic. But this logic can also make curl calls back to OpenROAD. So if we started to pick out pieces from here and push it into here, then that logic could still be called by our ABF application. The principle being we've only got the code in one place. And I said here we're experimenting with POCO libraries. Actually, we've moved forward since I first drafted this slide, and we're now looking at using exactly the same libraries that Actian use and for their calls. So we're all being consistent. So why migrate to OpenROAD? We could stick with the initial model and invoke the ABF services directly via ActiveMQ. However, the Open Workbench provides a whole rich set of capabilities for us. So this ability to convert the ViFred form and suck it in and create an OpenROAD frame. it's the simplest conversion path for frame OSQ to an OR frame as well, because when we harvest the ABF frame, it will bring all the code over, comment it out, and so now we can start to uncomment it and do the minimum amount of reworking to change the syntax, to implement syntax that mimics the sorts of things we'd have in FRS key and menu items. All the stuff that is in the ViVFred form, all the checking of variables, all the definitions of field values, all the masks, all of that you get in your OpenROAD application sucked in through the Actian tooling. The really, really important thing is the ability to interactively debug and hugely enhancing in productivity, as we all know. ABF is brilliant. We can write one line and it replaces 20 lines of JDBC code, but it's difficult to interactively debug. Whereas if we can get the code into OpenROAD, then we can start to debug it. And this point again about if we've got an application, an OpenROAD application, we can test it, and only when we know it's working do we create the web application, and the web application should work perfectly. And the other point is that though you were migrating to OpenROAD, there is a cost in that, of course. We need to buy OpenROAD server. You may already have that. If you have, great. But if we're going directly to the web and not actually deploying OpenROAD client applications, then you don't have to carry the cost of the OpenROAD clients on every desktop. And having used going to OpenROAD server, you get a whole load of integration options around OpenROAD server, because it is essentially a server running in the background, linked to Tomcat. So we've got a range of options for how we take our code forward in the future. So how do we actually separate ABF code? And I accidentally started to talk about that a little bit earlier on, but let's have a think about it now. So essentially, it's conceptually very simple. We've got all our form fields, our H fields, and our table fields in our ABF form. So if we can pop those into an ABF record or arrays of records, and then pass that data via those ABF structures to the 3GL, then we can use the exec4GL features to extract the data and create a JSON message in our ABF code. And just to be clear, if we can do that if we can move that into OpenROAD earlier rather than later, we can minimize the amount of code we've got to do in the ABF code, because we've got the call 4GL functions. We've got the JSON RPC calls for free, which will do all the movement of data from 4GL structures into JSON messages for us within OpenROAD, and that all came in 11.1. So we can then enqueue the JSON message on the active MQ, or we can make the libcurl C call depending which point we are in our evolution. And then, of course, you run the backend what's now effectively an ABF server with a -no forms and a -p to pick up the particular starting procedure that we've got. And the reason we still need to wrap these and get them to be called via an active MQ or equivalent queuing mechanism is because that then means that if we've got 50 servers that we start up to service a number of requests, the servers just all listen and wait, and whenever a message appears on the queue, one gets it. So we don't have the management of these servers is as minimal as we can get. If we haven't got anything particularly to help us do this, but if we just write some simple scripts that monitor the fact that we want 50 of them running, if one of them disappears, then our scripts can just start up another one very simply. So let's think about the opportunity using OpenROAD Workbench and Server. So we can mine the ABF catalogs to create our OpenROAD skeleton application. We can create an API similar to Core4GL in ABF, but we can utilize that, as I mentioned a moment ago, from OpenROAD if we go straight to OpenROAD and don't actually try to deploy the ABF application and get it to run in stage one. That's your call. You have the option. You can depending on your commitment and investment to OpenROAD. We've got the ability for the ABF logic to call and be called by the OpenROAD server, either via the queues or by curl. So we looked at this piece, and the challenge is, of course, that we don't want to create affinity between any one particular image and any one particular backend and a particular client. So by using an HTTP server or a Tomcat server, which then drives the messaging, that provides our integration between standard curl and a backend which is responding to message queues. And what we then have to do is to make sure that the reply queue, when the reply message is enqueued, it's got sufficient in there so that the caller can detect that it is for them. So in MQ series, for example, you use correlation ID, or you could have specific distinct temporary queues. There are all sorts of ways you can do that. And again, we've got that, and we can talk to you about the different ways you can do it on your preferred queuing mechanism, whether it's ActiveMQ, MQ, RabbitMQ, any of the others. And by starting to use OpenROAD Workbench, we're encouraging the use of these new advanced features, and we need to support the Actian team, make requests of them, so that because they're looking there to help us with this, and so new ideas about how we can extend OpenROAD Workbench to support this endeavor people are very interested in and are responding to us anyway with changes in short order. So let's just very quickly summarize those stages. We separate the ABF code into its business logic. We make each procedure stateless so that we replace any state data making that call. That means, for example, if the application made significant use of global variables, we'd need to send the global variables over each time, so the particular state of the front end's global variables can be replicated in the back end. We then separated the two via an API. We then migrate the API to OpenROAD and run WebGen and refactor the UI script to create an OpenROAD application, which we can then take to the web. And then we progressively migrate and refactor the business logic procedures in phases, slowly taking things off. And as I mentioned before, we migrate by business process only, try it out, see if it works. Only migrate the elements that are important to you. Leave the rest of the code that you only use once a year. And it's only done by a system administrator in the ABF applications. So, how long will this take? Well, we all know that this is a little bit of how long is a piece of string. It depends how many millions of lines of code you've got. But we have resolved all the problems, so we can give you a fast start. So all the plumbing is done, all the bits are working. You don't have to go and experiment saying how you do an ActiveMQ queue, or how you install OpenROAD server if you've not done it before, or how you get the curl libraries working. All that sort of stuff we've done for you. So in summary, we've got each of these components working. We can provide details of all the libraries we've used. Well, there are some key questions coming up. What is the quality of the existing and resulting code? Is it going to be maintainable after we've all busy refactored it? That's something you have to look at and satisfy yourself. We know that other mechanisms have been used in the past that people haven't been happy with. So try POC and just check that this isn't consultant's snake oil, and this really does work, and it is of enterprise strength, because we're talking about enterprise applications here that you've been running for years. You need to make sure that everything is robust. There are these interim phases. Does that make it too busy for you? Would you rather go straight from one all the way through to another, or straight from the starting point of a single ABF application straight through to WebGen, or using all the plumbing? Again, that's something you can try out. Or do you want to keep with some of these interim steps? Now, I'm a little short of time, but just a little bit on migration to the cloud, because the whole point is we need to go to web. And if we're going to go to web, we're probably wanting to go to cloud. And if we're going to go to cloud, we've got to get onto Red Hat pretty much. So you've got the migration from any Unix legacy platforms, if you're on them, to Red Hat and then onto the cloud. We can have it, however, once you're on VMware, the facilities now in between VMware and AWS that will allow you to run EC2 instances locally on-prem, so you can start to run bits of AWS on-prem. And through the same mechanism, you can then start to move your virtual machines into EC2 instances, keeping the same IP address. So absolutely vital to this model. It's not a panacea. You've got to properly understand the network architecture to make sure that you're not trying to stuff 20 gigabytes of data down 20 gigs a second, I exaggerate, down a 1 gig channel. You've got to make sure that the network will support what you're doing, but in principle, the capabilities are there. So that then allows you to migrate your EC2 instances from on-prem to AWS. And now we're in a position to start to think about using things like BPM to start to integrate these applications that are just web-enabled and service-enabled into our enterprise applications. And we've done AWS, so that's where our experience lies. One can look at the same piece of things on Google and Azure, I'm sure. So closing comments. Historically, there have been attempts to refresh AWS applications, and these haven't been successful. So why is this going to succeed now? Well, the key message is that a perfect model that tries to do the whole lot for you doesn't work. We've seen it sadly several times. Anybody who's been in the English market has been involved in these exercises over a number of years. We must accept that some refactoring by hand is necessary. The critical thing is, how do we design that refactoring to minimize the amount of code change and therefore maximize the value of the asset? It's this incremental approach gives you options, and we've talked about each of the different ways we could run, and it's on scope, it's on approach, so there are a lot of options you've got in considering how to do this. And Actian do understand, and they are extending the 11.2 capabilities. And I think, I'm confident that if we ask, they will deliver, because this is a really interesting opportunity, I believe, for Actian to take or help people get their ABF applications to the web. So anything that they can do, let's be blunt, preserves the longevity of the ABF code and therefore the use of ingress. So there's a real vested interest in that for Actian here to really help us and support us, as they seem to be doing. So the key is no big bang, incremental approach, harvest assets to best advantage. So here are our calls to action. We can put those building blocks in place in a couple of days for you if you want to get started rapidly. Connect to our team on LinkedIn. You saw the next slide. It's on the next slide. It's also on that first slide you saw. Come to our booth today and grill us on the challenges and test it out and see if our response to your detailed questions satisfy you. And here, what we've got to say about our other experimentation using AI tools, and in particular vector. We're looking for a lot of vector opportunities where there's a real need to get a sub-second query that gives you business advantage, and that's why we really like the AA reference site, and we're looking for how to do that for similar customers, and you'll see that reference elsewhere in the conference. What pain points have you got that we can help you solve more generally across your Ingress estate? We've been doing this for 30 years. I did my first Ingress project for BP in 1986, and we've been at it pretty much full time until the mid-noughties, and now we're back at it full time again, and really pleased to be doing so. A couple of blogs that comment about this migration for you. It'd be interesting for you to have a look at them, and welcome any feedback. Here's a quick slide on Diegesis. I'll let you read that, but that gives you a handle on some of our experience and our current capability. Love to come over to the US or work remotely if there are any of you out in the US who would like support from us. And so to questions.